Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, scholars and dignitaries, welcome to another episode. Welcome to my world.
Hello, friends. This is a more serious video I've made, and it's because I'm very concerned for our country, perhaps more so now than any time in the last 50 years. So, I am a third generation Democrat. Like my father and his father before him, I always thought that the Democrats were about God, country, and family, that they were especially about the middle class family and supported policies and laws that protected and upheld these core American values. I knew that the Democrats were behind slavery and the Jim Crow laws, and I knew that they were behind a lot more, including an unjust impeachment of President Richard Nixon. But I thought all of that was in the past. But I know that they've adopted a tax and spend policy that continues to put economic strain on the average families. I know that they were behind legalized gambling, legalizing mixed martial arts, a brutal and savage sport, the legalization of drugs, the upcoming movement for legalized euthanasia for the sick and the elderly and the disabled, and even the legalized prostitution initiatives that are being explored. And I've seen them use what I consider to be dirty politics time and time again. Anyway, yes, I remain a Democrat, although I find that I can no longer agree with most of the policies promoted by the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. So in the 2016 election, I did not vote for Donald Trump. But I also did not vote for Hillary Clinton. To be honest, without going into character assassination, let's just say that neither candidate, Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump, passed my litmus test for both ethical and moral behavior. So I could not vote for either. So I voted for someone else, someone I decided would be the best representative for the United States as president. Now, please follow me. The same is true for the 2020 election. Let's just say that both candidates lack a certain moral and ethical character I need as president. So with that aside, I am voting for neither Trump nor Biden. However, I have always voted and am voting again this year, but this time I'm voting for the policies they will represent and enact rather than for the candidate themselves. So my advice, based upon my studies and knowledge of public policy, both domestic and foreign, and based upon my own analysis of policy development and my testimony in public policy at the various levels of government over all these years, is to vote for the policies you see, the best public policies for the nation as a whole. Again, don't vote for the person, vote for the policies and the theme they will enact. And as an addendum, remember that few people, politicians included, understand that public policy is not about the next 4 years, but it has far-reaching implications for everyone decades into the future. So a policy that sounds good today can have multiple inherent difficulties. And if we make one mistake now by misinterpreting a policy or its consequences, millions can suffer for generations to come. Case in point, the Affordable Care Act. President Obama promised us that if we passed Obamacare, health insurance costs would decrease by 20%. And this was something the Democrats pushed and pushed and pushed hard. Basically, they needed a win. Yet, the exact opposite happened. Experts analyzed the act before passage and said that the costs of health insurance would skyrocket. Yes, the act increased the number of Americans with health insurance coverage, and it did eliminate pre-existing conditions as a barrier to coverage, so it reached those two significantly important goals. But those two goals could have been reached with minor tweaking without passing this massive act. As it now stands, the cost for the average American more than doubled, to the point that the average American now has to purchase health insurance with a $4,500 deductible. And a family of four who is not eligible for an exchange subsidy, on average, must spend $25,000 out of their own pocket before insurance begins to pay for their medical bills. When the experts asked Nancy Pelosi about this, she said that no, she hadn't even read the bill, but said we should pass it and then see what was in it later. The law itself was 1,000 pages long, but it had an addendum of regulations of almost 20,000 pages. No congressperson read that bill. Well, the critics were right. What was in it were more services, financial penalties, no attempt to mitigate lower costs, And again, higher costs, especially to younger and healthier individuals and families. The bottom line is that instead of saving $200 billion per year, as the Democrats pledge, healthcare costs have skyrocketed to over $3.65 trillion and will only continue to rise. Even Democrats have said, behind closed doors, that it was a disaster. Meanwhile, the health insurance companies are profiting more now than ever. Again, the idea was commendable, but the policy was poorly thought out and was designed to fail. Unfortunately, it could have been designed more effectively and have been more cost efficient had the Democrats taken their time and addressed the real issues. And that's only one example of a poorly designed and implemented public policy. And as an aside, for repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act, I believe that we do need to do something immediately to at least fix it, and maybe not repeal it totally. And maybe the next time they should read it first before they vote to approve it. So, what I am saying is to not vote on the character of the candidates during this election, but rather on the policies they represent. And here is clarification of those policies and the surrounding attitudes and attributes. And I just want to say one thing: so much of the damage that has been done by the media. The Trump vilification syndrome, where he is constantly criticized, belittled, and disparaged and can do nothing right, is a real factor and has become significant in politics today, and it has been for a large part due to the media. As for the media, today 5 corporations own and dominate the media, and these few companies are responsible for deciding what information is shared around the world and how it is shared. The 5 media giants have been described as a cartel which wields enough influence to change U.S. politics and define social values. And even Paul Harvey, one of the greatest journalists we ever had, said that the media fans the flames of discontent for higher ratings and more profits. Perhaps, I believe, even unto the point of civil war. And these media conglomerates are liberal and even ultra liberal. I'll give you one example. I was speaking to a friend of mine, and all of a sudden he commented, quote, "I think it's terrible. The police are killing black people. It's like it's open season on blacks." And I said, "What? Where did you hear that?" And he said, allegedly said, CNN. So I responded, "No, there is no truth to that at all. The fact is that there are about 1 million full and part-time police officers in America. Each year, there's over 60 million crimes and complaints that the police respond to. And most probably each year, they have over 300 million contacts with the public in the community, schools, and businesses. And unfortunately, there are police shootings and fatalities during the commission of crimes. But this year and every year, twice as many whites were fatally shot by police as blacks, again, as it was last year and the year before. So, no, there is no open season on anyone. But the key is to not commit crimes, including drug use, because that does put people at risk of contact with the police in a manner that may necessitate physical force and safety protocol. So the media is part of the problem, the way that they hype it up and exaggerate the news and even fabricate it. And by the way, one of the main reasons Trump is attacked all the time is because he is not a player within the system. He is not a Democrat nor a true Republican, and he is not subservient to the politics of Washington nor the deep state. He is not owned and cannot be told what to do. He does what he thinks is right, and thus he is hated by all that have a vested interest in keeping Washington running as usual. And proof? Days after the 2016 election, politicians, organizations, and others began to strategize about opposing President Trump's policies and administration, and big money, tens of millions of dollars, were raised and pledged in anti-Trump campaigns. Even the media began calling for his impeachment, even though he had just won the election. Anyway, during the Trump-Biden debate, President Trump made a statement that I questioned. He said that he did more in 47 months of his presidency than Joe Biden did in 47 years as a politician. So I wanted to check on Trump's accomplishments to see if they were significant during this time. And lo and behold, you may like him or not, you may like his character or not, but he has done a lot for America in this short time as president. Here are just some of his accomplishments. First and foremost, this president, the only president ever, was nominated for 3 Nobel Peace Prizes for his efforts to bring world peace, both in the Middle East, even when advised against it, and for his assistance in normalizing relations between Serbia and Kosovo, and for his overall strategy of peace and avoiding war called the Trump Doctrine. No other president has ever received 3 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize before. COVID. So the Democrats criticized Trump for his lack of action on COVID, the coronavirus, and said he himself was to blame for the 200,000 deaths in the U.S. But actually, Trump did respond well and hard. In fact, harder than perhaps any other president at any other time in our history. He issued an order in January prohibiting travel from China. He issued an order in early March prohibiting travel from the 26 European countries to the U.S., and yet he was called a xenophobe and criticized by Biden on these 2 moves. He structured a national COVID task force. He built the world's leading COVID testing system, built it up from nothing. He mobilized both the private and the public sectors for a unified response, and he retooled American industry to produce 130,000 more ventilators and personal protective equipment, millions of masks, gowns, hand sanitizer, and safety shields, and new COVID medications. And he has the CDC fast-tracking a vaccine that may be ready by the end of the year. He moved quickly to establish guidelines for nursing homes, and he initiated the Payroll Protection Plan to help save 51 million jobs. How about the jobs? Jobs have increased to virtually an all-time high since his presidency. He had record unemployment lows for Blacks and Hispanics, Latinos, and for Asian Americans. Unemployment for youth hit a 50-year low. Unemployment rates for women hit a 65-year low. Manufacturing job rates grew at the fastest rate in more than 3 decades. New unemployment claims had hit a 49-year low. This was very significant. Trump canceled the North American Free Trade Act, NAFTA, one of the worst public policies ever passed, and President Bill Clinton knew it when he signed it. We lost tens of thousands of good manufacturing jobs to China and Mexico, and Trump canceled NAFTA and brought back more than 400,000 manufacturing jobs. But he also replaced it with a historic and mutually beneficial trade deal between the U.S. and Mexico. He brought us record economic growth in both the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, and prior to COVID, the economic growth rate hit 4.2% in America. Retail sales went up 6%, and the median household income hit the highest level ever recorded. He declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, even when Obama and the Democrats promised to do it and reneged. And instead of paying $5 billion to build a new embassy, he purchased a building for $500 million and renovated it to make it work, thus saving us $4.5 billion. He canceled the new Air Force One contract with Boeing until they lowered their price from $5 billion to $3 billion. Trump has appointed more federal judges to date than virtually any other president at the same point in their presidency. He appointed almost 300 federal judges. Again, Obama left about 200 vacancies without filling them, and Trump said that they needed to be filled, and they were, as well as 3 Supreme Court justices. The U.S. now has at least 40% fewer illegals coming across our southern border, and Trump has built over 300 miles of the wall on the Mexican border. And the number of Mexican unauthorized immigrants was lower in 2017 than in any year since 2001. And by the way, the Democrats are for open borders, and that would guarantee a continual influx of illegal aliens into our states, as well as a permanent increase in welfare and health care costs rising into the billions of dollars each year. Just look at what open borders did to Europe. And again, what was interesting is that the Democrats supported a wall on the Mexican border prior to Trump's election. But when he met with Nancy Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer, they all of a sudden changed their minds and declined any and all federal funding to build this wall. Remember the horrendous problem with the toxic water contamination in Flint, Michigan? After the election, Trump made sure they received $100 million for repair to the water and sewer infrastructure to correct the problem. Trump canceled the U.S. commitment to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Act. Again, while Trump is all for trade deals that help to bolster American trade as well as the global economy, analysts found that the TPP was a secretive deal that favored big business in other countries at the expense of American jobs and especially at the expense of national sovereignty. And how about the Paris Climate Accords? Donald Trump drew a lot of criticism for having America withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, what was believed to be a unified global effort to fight climate change. Again, it's complicated, but it was a good decision. The devil was in the details. The Paris commitment not only meant a $3 billion commitment from America, but could have meant financial penalties if we did not achieve the proposed carbon emission standards, could have meant a loss of jobs for the middle class Americans, and although termed non-binding, the accord could have meant severe energy restrictions and regulations and rules that were unfair to the U.S. and would put the national sovereignty of the U.S. at jeopardy. One study alone showed that the cost to the economy would be close to $3 trillion in lost gross domestic product over the life of the accord and 6.5 million industrial jobs, with many households having $7,000 less income and in many cases much worse than that. And President Trump did not rule out rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, but not until the terms were realigned so that in participation, America would not be damaged or harmed. He signed the biggest package of tax cuts and reforms in history, saving the average household from 11 to 15% in taxes, meaning from $1,200 to $2,000 in taxes each year. He made America energy independent and an energy exporter. He implemented a list of protections and rights for persons with disabilities and developmental disabilities, for instance, including support and funding for independent living through the CARES Act. He built up the American military by installing a highly capable defense team that systematically addressed military deficiencies that developed and was inherited from the Obama years. Trump designed and built a U.S. Space Force, a sixth branch of the U.S. Armed Services. And while he was mocked for it, the fact is that there are several threats. And yes, a Space Force may be needed for certain operations, especially to address the asteroid comet scenarios that the world may see in the future. There have been several near-Earth objects, and there is a list of near-Earth asteroids that needs to be maintained and closely monitored and perhaps even addressed. President Trump has done more for the Veterans Administration and our veterans than virtually anyone else. He built up the VA healthcare system, signed the VA Mission Act to expand healthcare to vets, signed into law the VA Accountability and Whistleblowers Act, signed student loan forgiveness, signed the Forever GI Bill for educational benefits, and secured $8.6 billion for VA mental health services, including specialized help for veteran-related suicides, walk-in clinics, and urgent primary care services. He signed the Women in Entrepreneurship Act, which brings together women in the sciences with the business sector and increases jobs and careers in both the scientific and business worlds. He established the Victims Immigration Crime Engagement Office, VOICE, to fulfill his commitment to help people affected by criminal activity perpetrated by criminal aliens. To help root out corruption, President Trump signed a 5-year lobbying ban so that federal employees with power and access could not use that power to unjustly influence policy for the private sector. On May 3, 2018, he signed an executive order entitled The Establishment of a White House Faith and Opportunity Initiative, in order to provide recommendations on the administration's policy agenda affecting faith-based and community programs and to reduce the burdens on the exercise of free religion. He chose to not certify the Iran nuclear agreement, and rightly so. The U.S. did not win one concession in that agreement, and it was totally lopsided in favor of Iran. He is a law and order president and stands to help in the far left riots and insurgents in the cities. Several cities have asked for his help, and he sent in the National Guard, which immediately quashed the disorder. In terms of Puerto Rico, President Trump allocated $3 billion in aid to rebuild their electrical infrastructure and work to bring back industry from China to increase jobs in Puerto Rico. He signed a transparency bill for hospitals and doctors to advertise their rates and costs and level the playing field there. He signed a protection of life bill so that babies born prematurely or born alive after an attempted abortion would live and be protected under federal law rather than left to die or even be killed by the doctor involved after they were born. And in January of 2020, President Trump signed an executive order to lower prescription drug prices, to stop the system of kickbacks that raises prices, and to create a pathway for safe personal importation that ultimately would result in a savings of billions of dollars to consumers at the pharmacies. He has done more to lower drug prices than any other president. And there have been so many other accomplishments. He helped win the U.S. bid for the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. He helped get the U.S., Canada, Mexico World Cup in 2026. He reduced non-essential governmental regulations. He donated all of his salary to worthy charities. He finished off ISIS and the war against terrorism. He secured $6 billion to fight the opioid epidemic. He signed 130 bills into law, made 136 presidential proclamations, and issued 65 executive orders. And as according to a new poll just released, 56% of Americans believed they are better off now after 4 years of Donald Trump as president, and that's more than the 45% who said they were better off after the first 4 years of President Obama, or 47% that said that they were better off after 4 years of President Bush. And that was all in only the first 47 months. So meanwhile, while Trump is working on these problems and issues for the American family, the Democrats are blocking him at every possible turn. First, the Democrats say that Trump is racist. This started when, during the debates of 2016, he announced that he would ban travel from the 5 Middle Eastern countries that harbor and encourage terrorists until we could find a proper way to vet them to determine that they were not terrorists or enemies of the state. Immediately, the Democrats said that he was an Islamophobe and a racist against Muslims. They must have forgotten the events of September 11th, 2001, and the more than 40 terrorist cells. That's right, more than 40 attacks and near attacks that were stopped by government intelligence in the U.S. since September 11th. So, for political gain, the Democrats resorted to lies and innuendos, and this was supported by a less than honest news media that stood to make a lot of money by fanning the flames of discontent with the Oval Office. They just continued to attack him. He was a racist, an Islamophobe, a homophobe, a xenophobe, a misogynist, a fascist, a Nazi, which they quickly abandoned, and someone who hates the military. Then they planted a rumor about Russian collusion within his campaign, and it ended up causing a 3-year investigation that cost Americans over $40 million just to find out that it was all a hoax started by Hillary Clinton with Barack Obama's knowledge. The Trump campaign was even spied on in the early days, and people like Michael Flynn were arrested and prosecuted based upon some little-known and obscure law called the Logan Act of 1799 that was perhaps even recommended by Joe Biden himself. And then they attempted a coup d'etat. Do you realize that the Democrats themselves attempted through lies and innuendos to remove the President of the United States, to overthrow the government? They conspired as an organization and attempted with all of the resources at their disposal to destroy this man and his administration through a sham impeachment. And they did so shamelessly, and they almost succeeded. And that was a malicious and vicious process of hearings. The Democrats tried a technicality to remove the legitimate leader of the most honorable country in the world, and the people just let him get away with it. In other countries, they would have paid a terrible price for this betrayal, for this political deception. And then their performance at the State of the Union was despicable and irresponsible. They even tore up his report to the Congress in an act of childish defiance. And these are the people representing the greatest country on earth? And look at their policy platform. The Democrats want to legalize marijuana, a mood modifying, mind altering, powerful, addictive drug that causes pain and suffering to tens of thousands of families every year. But in my discussions with Democratic officials, they'll tell you that they can make a lot of money off of marijuana, both through taxes as well as through personal gain. In fact, Nancy Pelosi's son, Paul Pelosi, is chairman of the board for Freedom Leaf, a marijuana legalization company. And marijuana companies have given millions and millions of dollars to Democrats for their campaigns just to get influence to legalize another addictive drug. How sad is that? Democrats said that they are going to codify abortion, the most brutal, savage, and inhumane practice in all of history, and will do so in the event that the Supreme Court attempts to overturn Roe versus Wade. And by the way, even the thought of abortion into the third trimester or seeing a baby being born alive only to have the doctors kill it or let it die is an abomination, not just for that doctor, but for all of us. The Democrats have been especially silent on the protests, anarchy, and riots across the country, except when they can blame the police or white privilege. And when asked about their stance, they keep repeating that these are peaceful protests. Yes, peaceful protests. Just in Minneapolis, the riots burned down or otherwise destroyed some 1,500 buildings and businesses, and across the country caused billions of dollars in damages and caused fear and terror in many families. And the Democrats were silent. Law and order has been abandoned on the Democratic platform, and as everyone knows, a fundamental element to a civilized society is a state of peace and a sound system of law enforcement and criminal justice underlying that peace. The Democrats want to give away freebies, especially free college for all, except that they can't explain who's going to pay for it. The Democrats want to instill a new Green Deal that can cost upwards of $93 trillion and will not result in the level of new jobs as promised, but in fact will destroy jobs and the economy. The Democrats repeatedly have said that they are going to raise taxes. Meanwhile, people on fixed incomes are losing their homes as property and school taxes continue to rise. The Democrats seem really upset with religion, afraid that religion will stop modernism. And it's okay for Joe Biden to be a Catholic, but Amy Coney Barrett was attacked for her religious beliefs, even though she is one of the most eminently qualified candidates to sit on the Supreme Court. And what the Democrats did to Justice Kavanaugh was unspeakable. They savagely attacked him time and time again, like a pack of ravenous dogs in his hearings. The Democrats have said that they are going to stack the Supreme Court. They are going to change the structure of the Supreme Court, an institution that should remain clear of all political influence solely to gain a political advantage for their policy initiatives. The Democrats want felons to be able to vote. I wonder why. Maybe because they want to see a government soft on crime, and maybe they tend to vote Democrat. And they want illegal aliens to be able to vote. And they want to encourage mail-in voting, again, because it will draw out many more Democratic votes. But mail-in voting is full of inaccuracies and fraud. A report in the New York Times several years ago acknowledged that with mail-in voting, you can have as much as a 2% error or rejection rate. And that's big in a national election. Just in one incident alone, a mailing house in a city in upstate New York mailed out 100,000 ballots to the wrong people. Of course, not all the ballots were returned, so there is still a question about how many of these will be counted in the national election. And that's only one instance of many. And again, Democrats are for open borders. Again, not understanding what that means as everyone wants to come to America. Everyone. We did have a balanced system of immigration before President Obama, and we need to revisit that as soon as possible. And it is interesting that the Democrats have joined in to support the radical propositions of Black Lives Matter. This is an organization that is only loosely tied to improving the lives of Black Americans. By their own mission statement, they want to see socialism and to nullify the nuclear family. But every sociologist will tell you that the core element of a civilized society is the nuclear family, and without that, we will degenerate into a society of turmoil and disruptiveness. And their slogan is, quote, no justice, no peace, which is actually a threat of violence if they don't achieve their demands. And these are demands which fluctuate and change on any given day. And in reality, no one achieves justice. It can never be done in this world. So the result will always be violence for the rest of society. And as their demands increase, we are only a step away from reparations, another very expensive taxpayer obligation. And then there is the fallout from the protests, the riots and unrest and crime. But again, BLM can bring a lot of votes to the Democratic campaigns, so don't buck them. So there we have it. These are the issues I have seen and have been thinking about prior to the 2020 election. And I do have to say, yes, President Trump has done a lot for public policy as he had promised and has accomplished that all in the first 4 years of his presidency. All I have to say is, if you aren't comfortable voting for the person, be sure to know and understand the issues and what's really at stake, because the political rhetoric and fake news will certainly steer you in the wrong direction. It's designed to do that. It's what it's supposed to do, distraction and illusion. So, will Joe Biden pack the Supreme Court if he wins the presidency? Will he change the very structure of the one institution that is supposed to remain free from politics? I don't know. Neither he nor Kamala Harris will tell us. But then, what else aren't they telling us? Hey, be safe, be well, and God bless.